The night was unnaturally still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. White Rock Lake lay before him, a stretch of dark, inky water reflecting a pale, ghostly light under the sliver of a waning moon. David's car idled on the deserted road, headlights piercing a fog that clung to the lake's edge like smoke curling from a fire long extinguished. He wasn't supposed to be here, not tonight, not alone. But a wrong turn had led him down this path, a twist of fate that now left him stranded on this desolate back road. That's when he saw her. A lone figure stood at the edge of his high beams, a woman shrouded in white, dripping with water that seemed to seep from her skin. Her face was hidden, hair tangled and plastered to her cheeks, but the feeling was unmistakable. A chill seeped through the glass, colder than anything he'd ever felt. He should have driven away, should have ignored the whisper of her presence in the dark. But something far more powerful than fear held him there, waiting as she lifted her head. Twin voids where her eyes should have been locked onto him, pulling him closer. Welcome to White Rock Lake, where the past never stays buried. The night air around White Rock Lake was thick with decay, as if the lake itself was exhaling secrets buried under layers of murky water. David Matthews had been lost for nearly half an hour, his GPS fading out into static before shutting off entirely. He felt the weight of silence pressing in, the absence of any noise, not even the chirp of crickets. The fog that hovered over the road had a strange quality, twisting and pulling back from his headlights like smoke recoiling from fire. And then he saw her. A figure at the edge of his high beams, pale, nearly translucent, in a tattered white dress that hung in soaked ribbons around her frame, dripping a dark liquid that hissed as it touched the pavement. David's instinct screamed at him to drive on, to leave this apparition behind. But something rooted him to the spot, a primal urge that overrode all reason, forcing his foot off the gas pedal and onto the brake. She turned her head, her face emerging from the darkness, and David felt his blood turn to ice. Where her eyes should have been, there were only two endless voids, black holes that seemed to swallow every hint of light. Her skin held a greenish cast, the color of flesh left too long underwater, and tiny streams of dark water trickled from her eyes, her fingertips, her mouth. "Please," she mouthed, her lips barely moving. "Help me." He didn't know why his hand moved, but it did, reaching out to unlock the door. The click sounded impossibly loud in the thick silence. She glided, not walked, to the car, her feet never touching the ground, leaving a trail of black liquid behind her. She opened the door and slid into the passenger seat. The leather under her sizzled faintly, a dark stain spreading as she settled in. Where do you need to go?" David's voice was barely a whisper, but it was the only sound he could manage. She turned her gaze to him, those dark pits where eyes should be, and a rush of images filled his mind. A crumbling mansion at the lake's edge, windows broken and dark, doors hanging from rusted hinges. He didn't know how, but he understood. This was where she wanted to go. He drove on, his hands locked in a death grip on the wheel. With every mile, the air in the car grew colder, so cold that frost began forming intricate patterns on the windows, patterns that looked like twisted, screaming faces. His breath fogged before him, and soon even the rearview mirror held nothing but the growing dark, swallowing the car whole. The radio flicked on, static crackling before flipping through stations, settling on a distant, warped voice, speaking in garbled whispers. David tried to focus, tried to drown it out, but the voice felt like it was seeping into his brain. Beside him, his passenger sat in silence, her gaze fixed ahead. Drip, drip, drip. The sound of water seemed to echo, rising to fill the air, pooling at her feet but defying gravity as it crept up the sides of the car, coating the walls and floor like a living, breathing thing. At last, the house loomed before them, its decaying spires and broken windows a nightmare come to life. David's fingers had long since frozen around the wheel, his body numb with terror, his skin pale and chilled. Shapes moved behind the windows, figures watching, pressing their twisted faces against the glass. Dark, bloated figures, their mouths open in silent screams. "Thank you for bringing me home," she whispered, her voice gurgling with the sound of water. Her gaze turned on him and her mouth twisted into a smile, too wide, inhuman, revealing rows of teeth like broken glass and bones. "Now you join us." The dark water that had been rising in the car surged forward, and David felt it fill his lungs, choking him, wrapping around his limbs like icy chains. As his vision faded, he realized the terrible truth. She had never needed help. She was a trap, a hunter for the lake's restless dead, and he had been her prey. When his car was found 3 days later, there was nothing inside but a dark, slimy stain on the driver's seat and deep scratches across the dashboard, spelling out one last message: the lake hungers. Now they say if you drive by White Rock Lake on a moonless night, you might see them. The dead, standing at the roadside in tattered clothes, eyes dark and empty, dripping water that burns the earth beneath them. If you're unlucky enough to stop, you'll catch a glimpse of their true forms reflected in the rearview mirror. Bloated, rotting things with hollow sockets and waterlogged skin, wearing their human disguises like a trap. But by the time you realize it, it's already too late.